Hey folks, welcome back to My Keaton Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is a slightly delayed May wrap-up. I had my final assignment due for semester last weekend and had no room in my brain for anything except that. However, May, I didn't read as much as I had previously been reading, also because assignments, and I also got really bogged down with one particular book that was a library book, and so I had to return it and so I had to finish it, and I wouldn't let myself really read much else until I did that. So I think I read 6 things in May. So this is what they were. So the first thing was actually for university and is the only thing I currently have in hardcover, and that is Othello by William Shakespeare. So that was one of my texts. It's classic. It's tragedy. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it about, I think most people tend to look at the race issue, but what I ended up looking at, and I did actually do quite a bit on it, was the representation of love and loss in it, and the way that you couldn't have the loss and the tragic ending without the love, because, and I read an article which I found really compelling about the way that Shakespeare uses romantic love as a chaotic force in his plays. Because usually, particularly with the tragedies, but even sometimes with the comedies, romantic love is what makes things happen and what causes the problems and the chaos that then needs to be resolved. Or in the case of the tragedies, isn't really resolved, like as particularly in the case of Othello. So that was interesting. So that was the first thing I read. Then I finished Uncanny Magazine issue 36. I took notes. I'm getting better at taking notes on my Uncanny Magazine. So I really liked the story In the Space of 12 Minutes by James Yu, which was all about, it's really interesting, all about a man whose wife had gone on a mission to Mars, and in order to keep them both sane, they had AI avatars of each other, and the story was about the evolving relationship between the man and his avatar, and the way that, and the kind of idea of identity, is she real, is she not real, and then her experience at the avatar AI's experiences start to diverge from the real woman, and things sort of start to unravel but then put themselves back together in different ways. So that was really interesting. Also there was a Peter Jelly Clark story. You know me, I really like Peter Jelly Clark. This one was called The Mouser of Peter the Great, and was a sort of a fantasy about these boys who'd been brought as, they had their minds wiped at some point, I think, but then been brought from Turkey to Russia for the court of Peter the Great. And he had, one of the boys has this magic ability, and he's trying to investigate why something's haunting this palace and is causing problems for Peter the Great. And it's all about having to understand and grab hold of and believe in your own identity in order to fight what you need to fight. So that was really interesting. And I did have a note to say that the essays were good. I can't remember what essays they were, but apparently the essays in this issue were really good. Then I reread Rosemary and Rue by McGuire, which was also a book I had from the library. This is the first in the October Day series. I read it a few years ago when the series was nominated for the Hugo Award. The series is nominated for the Hugo Award again, and because I'm mostly up to date with Encrypted, except for the novel that came out this year, which I haven't gotten hold of yet, I figure since we've got until November to vote, I'm actually going to attempt to read as far into the October Day series as I can get, which, given that I think it's got like 15 or 16 novels plus short stories at this point. So, so I reread the first one because I literally didn't remember anything that happened in it. So urban fantasy, all about October Day, who at the start of the book, she's on an investigation looking for her liege's wife and daughter. She's half changeling. She's Dunyashi, half Dunyashi. I'm learning to pronounce these Fae names. Gets turned into a fish for 14 years. Suddenly the spell breaks and she has to get used to being in the world. And everything's moved on in 14 years, including her husband and child who don't want anything to do with her. And she's trying to stay away from the private investigation business, but she gets dragged back in. Of course she does. So, urban fantasy, I quite like urban fantasy. And, I love Seanan McGuire's work. So, finally digging into her October Day world. Then I read Uncanny Magazine issue 37. I'm getting so close. So close to being up to date on Uncanny. So there's a lot in issue 37 I really liked. It was a really good issue. In recent issues, there's been editorials from, I can't pronounce her surname, but her name's Elsa. I'm aware that she's both disabled, and I'm not sure, but and she's taken over the non-fiction editing. She first sort of popped up when she co-edited one of the Disabled People Destroy science fiction issue. And she's been writing a series of essays as her editorials about place, and how that affects her life and how that affects sort of the world that we're in and the science fiction community and all that kind of stuff, and how place is important to people. So I noted down that I really enjoyed her editorial in that particular month. I read Proof of Existence by Hal Y. Zhang, which is a time travel story. If I remember correctly, it's a time travel story where people just kind of disappear and then turn up again and no one quite knows how it works. And then this mother hires this scientist who's in a sort of a weird relationship with someone else to try and figure out how to get her daughter back. So yeah, that was cool. The Salt Witch by Martha Wells was fun. I'm trying to remember exactly this story, The Salt Witch. It's gone. I knew it before, it's gone. But anyway, it's Martha Wells. She of Murderbot Diaries fame. So that's a really cool it was a really cool fantasy stories. It was quite fun. Words We Say Instead by Britt E.B. Veed, which is all about AI spaceships. And so it was I've written it down as enjoyably melancholy. Because it was all about like a military commander who essentially, on orders from the military, betrayed her sentient ship, and now she feels really bad about it because they decommissioned all the sentient ships, and so now she's trying to hunt down the pieces to try and make up for it. So yeah, that was cool. Also really loved The Span of His Wrist by Lee Mandello, which was a queer, only slightly fantastic, like in that the main character could read people's memories from pieces of clothing, and yes, and is therefore working as a vintage clothing seller. But it was a really sweet little story about queerness and identity and grief and getting over broken relationships and the importance of those transient experiences. So it was sort of a once-off meeting between two people who had one night together, and they weren't looking for anything more. They weren't looking for a relationship. They both were coming from places of heartbreak. But they still were really important to each other in that moment. So that was a really sweet story. I really liked that story. And there was a poem that I really liked as well, which is called Making Accommodations, which struck a bit of a chord with me. Yeah, and then the other thing I read this month, so actually no, I think I only read 5 things, was Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, and this is the one that I really struggled with. It's on the Lodestar shortlist for YA fiction. It's the first in at least a duology. I don't think I'll be reading the sequel. It was well written. I really enjoyed the world in that it was kind of a fantastical world that was based in kind of Africa, the Middle East, and maybe even South Asian culture. So a kind of mishmash about an empire, which had all been brought together. And it was about a girl who had been born for a specific purpose. And this is, I think, where my issues with it was. It was a destined betrayal thing, which is not something I'm a big fan of, apparently. And also, it was a book that was like 480 pages, and there was no purpose to it until like somewhere in around page 300. Like, there was all this just growing up and not knowing anything, and there was no purpose to the story until like over halfway through the book. And I found that really irritating, and just didn't click with the characters either. And you know me, I'm a character-based reader, so yeah, I can understand why it's on the shortlist, and I can understand why people like it, just not for me. So yeah, so that was my May reading. Only 5 things. Hopefully I'm going to do better in June. Have been reading some really enjoyable stuff. So let's see how I go now that I have time and I don't have to restrict myself. Yeah, so if you like any of those books, happy to discuss them in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you all again really soon. Bye!